Get out! You did this on purpose! You're embarrassing me in front of my colleagues!
Get out! That was it. No, are you okay? No, let me call someone. Not even the basic human decency of a full sentence. Just, get out. Kimmie Adaeze Laurent stood in the hallway of the home she had cleaned, decorated, and filled with warmth for 4 years, her body doing something completely outside her control, her water broken, soaking through her dress, a contraction already coiling low in her back like a fist tightening around her spine, and her husband, Callum Weston, looked at her the way you look at a spill on an expensive rug. You did this on purpose. You're embarrassing me in front of my colleagues. She blinked. Callum, the baby is... I don't want to hear it. He opened the front door. Behind him, through the warm glow of the living room, she could see Laura Voss, blonde, beautiful, holding a wine glass, watching with an expression that wasn't quite pity, more like satisfaction. He picked up the hospital bag Kimmie had packed 6 weeks ago and dropped it at her feet. Take a cab. I'll come when dinner is over. The door closed. The lock clicked. And Kimmie stood on the front steps of her own home in a Boston snowstorm, 9 months pregnant, alone, as another contraction began to build. What happened next? She saved a man's life, and that man would change everything. Stay with me, because this story goes somewhere you are absolutely not ready for. Let me tell you who Kimmie was before the storm, because the world is very quick to see a woman in crisis and forget that she was a whole person before the crisis arrived. Kimmie Adaeze Laurent grew up in Atlanta, the daughter of a Nigerian-American nurse and a Haitian jazz musician who called her his best song. She was the kind of woman who walked into a room and didn't demand attention. She simply made the room better by being in it. Warm eyes, a laugh that arrived before she planned it, and a mind sharp enough to get her into medical school at 23. She didn't finish. That part is important. She met Callum Weston at a charity gala in her 2nd year of med school. He was 29, recently promoted at his father's investment firm, and devastatingly handsome in the specific way that makes sensible women make questionable decisions. He pursued her with the kind of focused intensity that felt like love and took 3 years to reveal itself as something closer to acquisition. She dropped out of med school in her final year. You don't need to work that hard, Callum had said, his hand on her face, his smile blinding. I'll take care of us. She believed him. She shouldn't have. What Kimmie didn't know, what she wouldn't fully piece together until much later, was that Callum had never actually stopped loving Laura Voss, his childhood sweetheart, the girl his parents had disapproved of because her family had new money, not the right kind. He'd been pressured to end things with Laura and build a more stable life. Kimmie, beautiful, accomplished, from a respectable family, had been the solution. Not a wife, a strategy. 4 years of marriage, a pregnancy, a home she had built from scratch. And still, on the night her body was doing the most profound thing a human body can do, creating life, Callum Weston looked at her and saw an inconvenience. She stood in the snow, no signal. The storm had eaten the cell towers alive. Contractions 4 minutes apart. Wind so sharp it felt personal. She started walking. Now here is what I need you to understand about Kimmie in this moment, because this is the part most people get wrong when they tell stories about women like her. She was not walking because she was strong in some cinematic, painless way. She was walking because she had no other option, and she had long since stopped waiting for someone to give her one. Her feet found the road by feel. Snow past her ankles, her hospital bag strapped across her chest, one hand pressed flat against her belly like she was making a promise. Hold on, just hold on a little longer. 3 minutes apart now. She had about 1.5 miles to the nearest hospital. She knew this because she had mapped every possible route 3 weeks ago, the way mothers do when they sense, without naming it, that they might be doing this alone. She was halfway there when her foot caught on something in the snow. She lurched, caught herself on a parked car, looked down. Not something, someone. He was massive, even collapsed, even half buried in snow, even completely still, Kim Do-han looked like a man who had never in his life been at anyone's mercy. Dark suit, now torn open at the chest. One arm extended like he had tried to catch himself falling. A face, sharp jaw, strong bone structure, dark brows, turned sideways against the snow, eyes barely open. A thin line of breath misting the cold air. And blood. So much blood. Spreading beneath him in a slow, quiet circle, already beginning to freeze at the edges. Kimmie dropped to her knees. Contraction. She breathed through it. 4 counts in, hold, release. Her eyes never leaving the wound. Left side, below the ribs. The bleeding was heavy, but not arterial. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Pulse. Weak, slow, but there. Hey! She touched his face. Hey, look at me! His eyes moved, dark irises finding her through what must have been extraordinary pain. She unraveled the scarf from her neck and pressed it hard against the wound. He made a sound, not quite a groan, something more controlled, like a man who had trained himself not to show pain and was losing that battle. Keep your eyes open, she told him. I need you to stay with me. She didn't know who he was. She had no idea that the man bleeding out in front of her commanded one of the most feared criminal networks in the eastern corridor of the United States. She didn't know that 300 men would have dropped everything at a single text from his phone. She didn't know that the blood on the snow around him had been put there by someone he trusted completely. She just knew he was dying, and she was the only one there. This is where I need you to pause and really sit with this, because if you think you know where this story is going, I promise you, you don't. Keep watching. She used the strap from her hospital bag as a compression brace across his chest, looping it under his arm to hold the scarf in place. Her hands were shaking, from cold, from exertion, from the contraction that was now cresting, demanding her full attention. She gave it none. She stood up, stepped into the road, and waited. For 5 minutes, nothing. Just wind and snow and the distant sound of the city pretending everything was fine. Then, headlights. A delivery truck, moving slow through the storm. She stepped directly into its path. The truck stopped 6 feet from her. The driver, a heavy-set man in his 50s, rolled down the window with wide eyes. "Lady, what are you—" "There is a man bleeding to death in the snow behind me," Kimmie said. Her voice was shaking, but her words were not. "And I am in active labor. You are going to help me get him into this truck, and you are going to drive us to Boston Medical right now." The driver stared at her. "I'm not asking," she said. He got out of the truck. Meanwhile, across the city, in a black car parked outside a restaurant with no sign on the door, Rian Beck checked his phone for the 3rd time. He was 34, elegant, the kind of man who smiled with his whole face while his eyes stayed perfectly, mechanically still. He had served Kim Do-han for 11 years, had been trusted with the syndicate's most sensitive operations, had sat at Do-han's right hand at every meeting, every negotiation, every moment where one wrong word could end a man's life. He had decided, 6 months ago, that he was done sitting beside the throne. He wanted it. He had paid for the assassination himself. 2 of his own men, dressed as business contacts, walking Do-han to a private meeting that would never happen. A body left in the snow to be swallowed by the storm. Clean, efficient, untraceable. His phone showed no confirmation. He refreshed the screen. Nothing. He told himself it was the weather, the signal. He told himself there was a perfectly good explanation. What he didn't tell himself, because he was not a man who entertained the possibility of failure, was that a pregnant woman in a burgundy coat had just refused to let his plan succeed. Boston Medical Center, 11:47 p.m. The truck came in hard through the ER entrance. Kimmie was out before it fully stopped. Trauma, GSW, left lateral thorax, significant blood loss, weak pulse. I've had compression on the wound for approximately 18 minutes. The paramedics who came running stopped and stared at her for a half second. This woman, heavily pregnant, blood on her hands and her coat, speaking with the precision of someone who had spent years in clinical training. "Move," she told them. They moved. Duhan was rushed through the double doors. Kimmie made it 6 steps before a contraction hit her like a wall, and she went down, caught by a nurse named Patricia, who appeared seemingly from nowhere with a wheelchair and the calm efficiency of a woman who had seen everything. "Baby's coming?" "Baby's been coming," Kimmie managed through gritted teeth. "Okay, sweetheart, I've got you now." And Patricia did. She stayed with Kimmie through every contraction, through the part where Kimmie gripped the bed rail hard enough to leave marks in the metal, through the moment the doctor said one more push, and Kimmie pushed like she was pushing out everything. The 4 years, the locked door, the coat thrown at her feet, the word, "get out." At 12:41 a.m., her daughter arrived. Small, furious, perfect. The nurses cleaned her and placed her on Kimmie's chest, and Kimmie looked down at this new, complete, absolute person and felt something shift inside her. Something that had been slowly bending under years of weight, finally breaking clean. Not in a sad way, in the way that a tree that has been growing wrong finally rights itself toward the light. "Hi," Kimmie whispered. "I'm your mom, and I promise you, nobody is ever going to make you feel like you're too much trouble. Not ever. Not once." Patricia, who had been a labor and delivery nurse for 22 years, turned toward the window so Kimmie wouldn't see her cry. Down the hall, a very different kind of chaos was unfolding. 12 men in long coats had arrived at Boston Medical Center within 40 minutes of Duhan's admission. They came in staggered groups of 3, as if they had practiced this, taking positions at every entrance, every stairwell, every elevator bank. The hospital administrator called security. Security assessed the situation and quietly decided not to engage. Duhan's head of personal security, a man named Gino, quiet and precise, with the kind of stillness that made people nervous, had taken a position directly outside the trauma bay. When the surgeon emerged to report that Duhan had survived and was being moved to the ICU, Gino exhaled once. Just once. Then he started asking questions. Who brought him in? The truck driver, who had been sitting in a waiting room chair with the expression of a man who had seen too much, looked up. "Lady," he said. "Pregnant black woman. She's the one who found him. She stopped the bleeding herself. She's the reason he's alive." Gino went very still. "Where is she?" "Labor and delivery," the nurse at the desk said, before she could stop herself. "She delivered about 20 minutes ago." Gino pulled out his phone and typed one sentence to an encrypted line. "The one who saved him. Find out everything." If you're enjoying this story so far, go ahead and drop a like. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. Now, back to Callum. Callum Weston arrived at Boston Medical Center at 8:14 the next morning. He was showered. He smelled like expensive cologne. He had a coffee cup in one hand and his phone in the other, and he walked through the hospital entrance with the unhurried confidence of a man who had decided exactly how this morning was going to go. He had already prepared the narrative. "My wife went into early labor. It was all very sudden. I came the moment I could." He'd even rehearsed a look of concerned relief in the elevator mirror. He found Kimmie's room. She was sitting up in bed, her daughter asleep in the bassinet beside her. No makeup, hair wrapped, dark circles under her eyes like bruises. She was, somehow, the most composed person he had ever seen. He smiled, that practiced, photogenic smile. "Baby." He crossed the room, leaned down to kiss her forehead. She didn't move toward him or away from him. Just let it happen, the way you let weather happen. "You did amazing. I knew you could handle it. How are you feeling?" "Handle it," she repeated softly. "The nurses told me you were incredible." He looked at the baby. "She's beautiful. You weren't here. Kimmie, the storm was... You locked the door, Callum." The smile flickered, just slightly. "We can talk about all that when you're feeling better. Right now what matters is that you're both healthy." "I want you to leave." Silence. "Kimmie, I'm not asking." She had said those exact words to a truck driver 8 hours ago, but this time they landed differently. This time They had the weight of 4 years behind them. Callum set his coffee down slowly. The charm was still on his face, but his eyes had gone cold. The real Callum surfacing through the costume. "You're emotional. That's understandable, but I'm not." The door opened. Gino stepped in. He was not a large man by action movie standards, but there was something about him, an absolute absence of hesitation, a quality of total attention that made the room feel smaller. "Mrs. Laurent?" Callum turned. "Excuse me, who are—" "I wasn't speaking to you," Gino said without looking at him. He kept his eyes on Kimmie. "Mr. Kim Do-han is awake. He is requesting to see you at your convenience. There is no pressure. He only wanted you to know." Kimmie blinked. "The man from last night?" "Yes." Callum's eyes moved between them. "What man? Kimmie, what is he talking about?" She looked at her husband, really looked at him, for what would turn out to be the last time she looked at him as a wife. "While you were at dinner," she said quietly, "I saved someone's life." Across the city, Ryun Baek was reading a report on his tablet that was making his coffee go cold. His men had pulled Kim Do-han's hospital admission records through a contact inside the system. Admitted, 11:53 p.m., brought in by civilian truck. Compression wound management on scene, described by paramedics as unusually precise for a bystander. The civilian who performed initial treatment, a woman named Kimmie Adaeze Laurent, age 29, admitted to labor and delivery at the same time. Ryun Baek stared at the name. Then he pulled her background file and found something that made him sit forward slowly. Kimmie Laurent, former medical student, doctor opt-out final year, currently married to... He stopped. He read the name again. Callum Weston. He set the tablet down. His mind moved through the connections with the cold efficiency of a man who had spent a decade navigating a criminal empire. Callum Weston, the American businessman they had been using for 18 months to run financial transfers through a network of shell companies. A man who thought he was simply doing profitable business with foreign investors and had no idea, or pretended to have no idea, that those investors were a rival syndicate actively dismantling Jeonsa operations from the inside. The man who had thrown his pregnant wife into the street, the wife who had saved Do-han's life. The coincidences were stacking in a way that Ryun Baek did not believe in coincidences. He picked up his phone and made a call. "I need Kimmie Laurent watched, and I need Callum Weston available for a conversation." He paused. "A private one." Kim Do-han had been awake for 4 hours before he agreed to let the doctors run their checks. He had spent those 4 hours doing what he always did when he found himself in an unfamiliar position. He gathered information. Gino had briefed him on everything: the woman, the truck, the compression technique, the fact that she had been actively delivering a baby while coordinating his rescue with the calm of someone who had decided, without drama, that 2 lives were worth saving that night. He had also been briefed on Ryun Baek. He had not reacted to that information the way Gino expected. No rage, no immediate orders. He had simply looked at the ceiling for a long moment and then said, "I trained him well." Which was the most terrifying response he could have given, and Gino knew it. Now, Do-han sat in the hospital bed, against explicit medical advice, because lying flat felt like surrender, when the door opened and Kimmie walked in. She was carrying the baby. She looked like someone who had been through a war and come out the other side, not exactly unscathed, but absolutely undefeated. She was wearing a hospital gown, and someone had brought her a cardigan that was slightly too big, and she stood in the doorway of his room with the careful steadiness of a woman who was still in pain, but had decided that pain was not the most important thing happening right now. Do-han looked at her. He had met heads of state. He had sat across from men who controlled billions of dollars and private armies. He had spent 30 years in rooms where the wrong expression could get someone killed. He could count on one hand the number of people who had ever done something for him without calculating what they would receive in return. "Sit," he said, then catching himself. "Please." She sat. The baby stirred but didn't wake. "I owe you my life," he said. No preamble, no small talk. You don't owe me anything, she said. You were dying. I was there. That is a very simple way to describe what you did. It was a simple decision. He studied her. You were in labor. Yes. You stopped to save a stranger. You would have been a dead stranger if I hadn't. Something moved across his face, there and gone, like light on water. If Gino had been watching, and Gino was always watching, he would have noted that it was the first unrehearsed expression Doohan had shown in years. What is her name? He asked, nodding toward the baby. Kimmie looked down at her daughter. I haven't decided yet. I kept waiting for the right moment. There is rarely a right moment, Doohan said. There is only the moment you have. Kimmie looked up at him. The room was very quiet. I'm going to tell you something, Doohan said, that my people have found. About your husband. My ex-husband, Kimmie said. He paused. You've decided? I decided at about 2 a.m, she said, while I was doing it alone. If this story has you hooked, and I think it does, subscribe before you forget. New stories drop every week, and they don't get less intense than this. Okay, back to Callum. Doohan told her everything. Not softly, not managed. He laid it out the way he did everything, with precision and zero unnecessary decoration. Callum Weston had been laundering money for a syndicate called Muryang, a Korean crime network that had been systematically targeting Jeonsa operations for 2 years. Callum wasn't the mastermind. He was a conduit. A useful, handsome, perfectly positioned conduit who had been running financial transfers through 12 shell companies while believing, or performing the belief, that he was simply doing profitable international business. The money that had funded 3 attacks on Doohan's operations, including, indirectly, last night. Kimmie sat with this information. He didn't know? She asked. That is the question, Doohan said. The answer will determine what happens to him. What does that mean? It means that if he was ignorant, he is simply a fool who got used. If he was not... Doohan left the rest of the sentence in the air between them. Kimmie looked at her sleeping daughter. He's not smart enough to be complicit, she said finally. He's just greedy and careless. Doohan almost smiled. It was a very small almost, a shadow of almost. That, he said, is both an insult and a defense. You are remarkable even when you are exhausted. She looked at him sharply. He held her gaze. He was not a man who looked away. Callum was in the hospital cafeteria, on the phone with Lara, when Ryun Baek's man found him. He didn't know it was Ryun Baek's man. He saw a well-dressed Korean man in his late 20s, approaching with the pleasant expression of someone about to ask for directions. Then the man sat across from him without being invited. Mr. Weston, my employer needs a word. Callum blinked. I'm sorry, who are... The accounts. The man said it quietly. The Orion accounts, the Pacific Rim transfers, the offshore structures you set up in January. Callum went very still. My employer is concerned, the man continued pleasantly, that your situation, your wife's connection to certain parties in this hospital, may have created a complication. He wants reassurance. I don't know what you're talking about. The man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Weston, you have been doing business with people who are not forgiving of confusion. I suggest you take the call. He placed a burner phone on the table between them. It began to ring. What Callum didn't know, what Ryun Baek didn't know, was that Gino had placed a man in the cafeteria 40 minutes ago. He had watched the entire exchange. By the time Callum picked up that phone, a full recording of the conversation was already being compressed and sent to a secure server. And Doohan, receiving the transcript on a tablet in his hospital bed, read it twice. Then he made one call. Pull the Weston files, all of them. I want his exposure complete before morning. And I want the Muryang account trail ready to hand to the FBI field office in Boston. A pause. Beck, he said to the silence on the line. I know you're listening. You trained under me. You know I always have the room. Another pause. You wanted the throne. You should have been patient. Now you'll spend your patience in a federal courtroom. He ended the call. Gino, in the doorway, raised an eyebrow. It's done, Duhan said. He set the tablet down. Now leave me. I have something more important to do. The snow had stopped. Kimmie stood at the window of her hospital room, her daughter finally named, finally asleep in the bassinet, watching the city reappear from under the white. Boston, in the early morning after a storm, has a particular quality. Everything cleaned, everything quiet, the world briefly pretending to be new. She heard the door. She assumed it was Patricia, or the pediatric nurse, or Callum making one more attempt with that rehearsed look of concern. She turned. It was Duhan, standing. Barely, one hand on the doorframe, Gino hovering 3 steps behind him with the expression of a man who had objected strenuously and been completely ignored. Duhan was in a hospital gown with a jacket someone had draped over his shoulders, IV still attached to his left arm, moving with the careful deliberateness of a man who was absolutely not supposed to be moving. He crossed the room. He stopped beside her at the window. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood together, watching the city shake itself clean. Callum is being escorted out of the building, Duhan said. She nodded. She had already felt it coming like weather. And then? Federal investigators will have everything they need by tonight. His involvement was not as innocent as you suggested. He knew enough. She closed her eyes briefly. I'm not surprised, she said. I think I stopped being surprised by him a long time ago and just stopped admitting it. That is what happens, Duhan said, when someone works very hard to make you doubt your own perception. She looked at him. He lifted one hand, slowly, with the deliberateness of a man who rarely made unplanned movements, and brushed a small smudge from her cheek. His hand stayed, just barely, just at the edge of her jaw. You are not going home with him. You don't know anything about my life, she said. I know that you saved mine. I know that you delivered your daughter alone in a storm because the man who was supposed to be there chose a dinner party. I know that you have been carrying things that were never yours to carry. A long beat. And I know, he said quietly, that I have never in my life owed anyone anything. And I find that I don't experience this as a debt. Then what is it? He looked at her, something unguarded, something almost unfamiliar on his face. Something I intend to understand. He leaned down. The kiss was quiet, not dramatic, not cinematic in the way of movies. It was the kind of kiss that happens between 2 people who have both just survived something, who are both standing in the strange, undecorated aftermath of a night that broke things open. Brief, warm, deliberate. When it ended, she looked at him with an expression that was equal parts exasperated and undone. You just had surgery. The corner of his mouth moved, that almost smile, that shadow of something human behind the ice. I have survived worse. That is a terrible argument. And yet, he said, you haven't moved. She hadn't. The door to the hallway opened. Callum turned the corner, flanked by 2 men in suits who were not hospital security and who were not asking him politely, and stopped when he saw them. Duhan, standing beside Kimmie at the window, not touching her now, but close. Close in the way of people who have already crossed a distance that can't be uncrossed. He looked at Callum the way you look at something that used to be a threat and has since been managed. Callum opened his mouth. Kimmie. Mr. Weston, Duhan said, calm, quiet, the specific quiet of a man who has never needed to raise his voice. The gentlemen beside you have a car waiting. I suggest you use it. Callum looked at Kimmie. She looked back at him. She said nothing. Sometimes nothing is the most complete answer. He left. Kimmie turned back to the window. After a moment, Duhan came to stand beside her again. What happens now? She asked. Whatever you decide, he said. That is what happens now. She thought about that. Outside, a snowplow was moving slowly down the street, pushing the last of the storm aside. Somewhere in the bassinet, Her daughter made the small, unconscious sound of a person deeply and safely asleep. "I need a name," Kimmie said. "For the baby?" "I've been calling her the baby for 12 hours. She needs a real name." Duhan was quiet for a moment. "In Korean," he said, "the name Ara means to know or beautiful, but it also carries the meaning of calm waters after a storm." Kimmie looked at him, then she looked at her daughter. "Ara," she said softly, testing it. "Ara Laurent." The baby didn't stir, but something in the room settled, the way things settle when the right word finally lands in the right place. "She's going to ask questions," Kimmie said, "when she's older, about this night." "What will you tell her?" "The truth. That the night she was born, the world was cold and unkind, and we survived it anyway." Duhan looked at her profile in the window light. "We," he said. It wasn't a question. Kimmie glanced at him sideways. "Don't make it weird," she said. And Kim Duhan, feared head of the Jeonsa syndicate, a man who had not laughed freely in longer than he could track, made a sound that was almost a laugh. 3 months later, Callum Weston was cooperating with federal investigators in exchange for reduced charges. His father's firm was under audit. Lara Voss had already moved on. She was nothing if not practical. Ryun Beck was in custody. It turned out Duhan's loyalty, once given, was absolute, and his patience for betrayal was exactly 0. Kimmie passed her medical licensing exam on a Tuesday morning, Ara strapped to her chest in a carrier, the baby sleeping through the entire test. She had pulled her old coursework from storage, re-enrolled in a completion program, and finished what she had started. Not for Callum, not for anyone else. For the girl she had been at 23, who had been brilliant and hadn't finished. And Duhan? Duhan was, for the first time in 30 years, learning something he had no protocol for. He showed up at Kimmie's apartment on a Thursday with no warning and a blanket that cost more than most people's rent, because Gino had told him it was cold in her building and he hadn't known what else to do. She opened the door, looked at the blanket, looked at him. "You could have texted." "I don't text," he said. "Everyone texts." "I come in person. It is more honest." She stepped aside to let him in. Ara, in her bouncy chair, turned her head toward the sound of his voice. Duhan crouched down in front of her. This enormous, formidable, feared man, crouching at the feet of a 3-month-old. Ara grabbed his finger. He went absolutely still. Kimmie, watching from the doorway, pressed her lips together to keep from smiling. "She's strong," he said. "She gets it from her mother," Kimmie said. He looked up at her. "Yes," he said simply. "She does." And that is the story of the night Kimmie Adaeze Laurent was thrown into a storm and came back with the storm behind her. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, then you already know what to do. Like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that the worst night of your life can turn into the beginning of something you couldn't have planned. New stories drop every single week. Some will surprise you. Some will wreck you. All of them are worth your time. I'll see you in the next one.